Okay. So I'd like to start with a prayer. And this is from the liturgical materials for honoring God in creation. That's in the Book of Occasional Services, the 2018 edition. So very much available. This is a prayer for the justice of God and the dignity of all creatures. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Holy God, your mercy is over all your works, and in the web of life, each creature has its role and place. We praise you for ocelot and owl, cactus and kelp, lichen and whale. We honor you for whirlwind and lava, tide and topsoil, cliff and marsh. Give us hearts and minds eager to care for your planet, humility to recognize all creatures as your beloved ones, justice to share the resources of the earth with all its inhabitants, and love not limited by our ignorance. This we pray in the name of Jesus, who unifies what is far off and what is near, and in whom, by grace and the working of your Holy Spirit, all things hold together. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so I've had some Rick Wilson's joined us. Hi, Rick.
I thought I just clicked in Judy. There she is.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got about an hour to try to give you some information that you might need if you want to institute a season of creation in your parish, and we hope that you will. And so we know that this is new for a lot of you folks, and we've got some experience here, and Steve Keplinger, who's going to do this session with me, but we hope that there's information that we can give you, and we're happy to answer your questions. So I'd like to welcome all of you and introduce Steve. Actually, I'd like Steve to introduce himself. I think you all know who I am. I'm Pam Hyde. I'm the Canon for Creation Care in the Diocese. And Steve, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So I think most of you know me. I'm Steve Keplinger. I'm the rector at Grace St. Paul's in Tucson. I was in St. David's and Page before I was here. And I started doing a season of creation while I was there. So this will be my 20th year doing a season of creation. So back in the old days, there were not a lot of folks out there doing this. I couldn't find more than a handful of churches around the country that were doing it. But we'll talk a little bit about that as we get into this.
Great, thanks, Steve. So I just want to briefly let you know what we're going to cover, and if it occurs to you there's some other things that you'd like to know, we'll see if we can try to cover those things as well. But we'll start with a little bit on the theology behind creation care. Always good to start with theology and scripture, so we're going to do that. We'll talk a little bit about preaching and try and give you some tips, and we'll take a look at a couple of gospel passages that will come up if you're doing the September 1 to October 4 season of creation. We'll talk a good bit about building a liturgy for the season of creation, which I know is what a lot of you are interested in. And then I'm hoping we can have some time to brainstorm some ideas for events that you could do at your church during creation season. So it's always fun to go beyond liturgy and get into some activities that your parish can share. And then we'll take some questions, and that's kind of what we've got on the schedule. Anybody have anything burning that they were just hoping that we would cover that we can try to get to? Okay, good. So I'm going to let Steve take the theology piece. So it's all yours, Steve.
Thank you, Pam. So it's hard to know where to begin, but I'm going to cut to the chase here. The church disassociated itself with creation, I think, pretty early in the game. And my sense is that probably started during the Celtic missionary times. When the church reached the Celtic and Druid people, they just seemed to be petrified about pantheism, about the Celts worshiping trees, etc. And they really responded pretty vehemently about that. And as far as I can tell, that's when the church made a major direct move towards transcendence and away from God's immanence and presence in creation, because they were just so bent on fighting the idea that God was in nature, um, because of the pantheism in those cultures. And we really made God pretty much transcendent at that point, which is pretty bizarre in a religion that was based in incarnational theology and Christ being with us. But I think that's pretty obvious as you go through what happened. And that stayed with us for hundreds and hundreds of years. And as you all know, as well or better than me, we did the same thing when American missionaries came to America, and we put off all the indigenous thought that God was part of nature, and we fought that really big time. So as a consequence, we saw nature as separate from God, um, and that people were more important than the rest of creation. And you can see that throughout our prayers and our theologies. Just two quick examples. The big prayer that we wrote to connect us with creation, Eucharistic Prayer C, begins with that famous line, we are the rulers of creation. And that represents really, really well how we separated ourselves from creation and put ourselves above it, from the early days, from the 3rd or 4th century. I would argue that the church was very different before the interactions with the Celts, and that really changed us. Now, some folks have changed that sentence in Eucharistic prayer for C to we are the stewards of creation. And I'm going to suggest to you something that you're probably not going to hear from a lot of other people. Stewardship is a great word in the church, and we use it for everything, but I think it does not work when we're talking about our relationship with creation, because it still suggests that we have some sort of hierarchical aboveness over the rest of creation, and that we're here to take care of it. And yes, we're caretakers, and I would suggest that's a much better word for what we're doing there. But that theology is throughout our throughout even our prayer book. Form 4, prayers of the people, give us all a reverence for the earth as your own creation, lovely, but then that we use its resources rightly in service to others. So instead of seeing the earth as part of us and part of God and all connected, we are still seeing it as a resource for us to use for our own good. And I would suggest that as long as we stay in that kind of relationship with nature, well, you know the mess that's gotten us into. And theologically, I think we have the opportunity to turn all of this around. I think we need to take responsibility for not only condoning the destruction of the planet, but endorsing it. And I think, from my perspective, that's what the season of creation is all about, retrieving the church's incarnational understanding, and that the earth is a part of God and therefore sacred. So any way you can get across to people the sacredness of creation, I think that's our role in what we're doing here. And I firmly believe that we're not going to change our present situation by financial means or economic means or anything else. I think it's or even ethical reasons. I think we've got to do it from the perspective of sacredness, and that this is our job as Christians. So So I see the season of creation as a retrieval of the essence of our incarnational faith. I think it's taken us back to our roots, and I am totally convinced that it's the only way we're going to save the planet. So, thoughts? All right. Gosh, you guys aren't going to argue with me? Okay.
Well, Steve, there has been, of course, that constant strain within Celtic Christianity that did maintain the sacredness of creation.
Exactly.
And some of the, even Pelagius, I think, is someone who was severely misjudged because he had a great defense of creation.
Yep.
And Augustine, of course, coming from his Manichaean background, really did a disservice in not listening to what was being said. And, then, other Irish and Scottish theologians in the 8th and 9th centuries fought hard for the understanding of the sacredness of creation.
Yep. And thank God that the Celts held on to it all that time. And then we don't really see it come back until Francis of Assisi.
Right.
And at that point, there's another attempt to recover that essence of our faith, and then that gets pushed down. So I think you're absolutely right. And thanks for saving Pelagius too. Yep.
I know from my brief understanding of Celtic and Druid spirituality too, I think the Christians came in so hard,
yep.
and that they were speaking two different language, and they were just totally misunderstood. A lot of I don't want to sound like I'm speaking too strongly or boastfully about, but it was just a really misunderstanding of a lot of the concepts that, like, and even languaging, like as far as even like the Druids are, but from the Christian point of view, or like you had said, thought they were worshiping the tree or the oak or the brook or the river or the salmon or but they really weren't, at least from my understanding from when you dive really deep into more of their spiritual, like Native American things, it was more of a sense that if they believed in one spirit, one divine spirit, but it could assume many different forms or any shapes. So if the divine spirit was speaking you through from the brook or in the tree or then they weren't worshiping the tree or the water. They were honoring what was being communicated through, and they realized the divine spirit had many different facets or expressions. If that channel was speaking in a powerful way to them, they just honored that, but they weren't worshiping the source. And that never got really communicated or understood as far as the Christians. They just, outsiders thought that they were worshiping idols. And I think later Francis kind of like you said, Father, revisited it and kind of brought it back into a more modern understanding, which kind of but then also got squashed down. Anyway, I just wanted to share that bit.
Yeah, thank you. Yep. And I think so. I truly believe that's what we need to be doing, is rescuing that was so squashed down. And why the church was so petrified about pantheism is difficult to say, but they certainly were. And I think they took away the roots of our faith doing that. So anyway, enough said. I know I'm preaching to the choir here. Sunday, I preached, I actually compared Sitting Bull to John the Baptist and talked about the ghost dance, and the fact that was the essence of what the ghost dance was all about, was bringing back that connection with all of nature and bringing nature back. And the Christian church totally missed what the ghost dance was all about and what indigenous people were trying to do here. So we got to make those connections back for people, and that is so important. All right.
So speaking of preaching, shall we move on to some talks about preaching and how to preach creation care? And how many of you have actually already preached creation care? Yeah, okay, good. So so sometimes, I've actually said that that there isn't a gospel text that I can't preach creation care from. So perhaps I'm boasting a little bit prematurely, but I really think that it's true. Some are easier than others, but so we thought maybe Steve and I could give you some very practical tips about preaching creation care from gospel passages, and do so by taking two texts that will show up during I think they're both in the month of September, aren't they, Steve? Is yours?
I think mine is the first Sunday in October.
Okay, so, but during that season, if you're observing it as many churches do, from the World Day of Prayer for Creation Care on September 1st to St. Francis Day, it will fall in that period. And this is a good time maybe to say that there are options for when you can hold the season of creation, observe it. I think that the scales are tipping towards that September 1 to October 4th period, but Steve has always observed it during another good period, which is starting at the St. Francis Day and going through until the Sunday before Advent. So both are options, and you can choose what you want to do. So Steve, do you want, go ahead, Kathy, you had a question?
Yeah, I do. As Pam knows, Vicki and I are attending a church that is without a staff clergy person. We're in transition. We have a different preacher every single week. And the laity are attempting to guide the liturgics and to continue on. So we had a worship committee meeting yesterday, and I hope this isn't in violation of diocesan guideline, but we decided to do the first Sunday in October, and then for the month, for the 4 weeks next, for a total of 4 weeks, as opposed to going all the way to Advent, so that we didn't have to worry about interference with All Saints and all of that.
Yeah, and that's, at this point, it's open as to when you want to actually observe and celebrate the season. It has not been, specified. We hope that at some point that we will have a officially designated set of dates for the season of creation. And we hope that all the churches will be observing it, but you have a little more leeway at this point, so that's fine.
From my perspective, as long as you're doing it, I'm happy. So
and the bishop's fine.
Slide it in. Yep.
Yeah, the bishop's fine with the churches creating their own season. I mean, if you want to celebrate it, instead of Lent, I think that we'd have a problem with that. But I mean, you have the period, what is called ordinary time. I think there's some flexibility in there. Okay.
Yeah, I'm looking at starting with St. Francis Day and then going through Thanksgiving Day, because we're also going to be celebrating Indigenous People Day in October. And, I just really love Robin Kimmerer's perspective on reciprocity in Native people's relationships with nature. And so they don't necessarily pray to the rocks and the trees, but they give thanks to them for all that they provide. And I feel that Native liturgies and prayers and ceremonies really do honor our relationship more truthfully than some of our liturgies. So that's how I'm looking at it, is to at least include Indigenous People Day.
Great. Thanks, Monica. So preaching tips, preaching ideas. Steve, do you want to lead off here, and then I'll follow with another passage?
Sure. So the opening prayer that Pam did, the season of creation subcommittee at General Convention, we wrote those prayers together. So three of the people in that committee were Jennifer Phillips and Ann Routhorn, who we're going to talk about here in a moment, and me. Um, and those prayers in the Book of Occasional Services are pretty cool. But Jennifer wrote this book, Preaching Creation, Jennifer Phillips, on that committee. And what it is a book that goes through the entire lectionary and says, this is how you can preach creation with this gospel. So I kind of think Jennifer did it on a bet that somebody said, hey, you can't figure out a way to do it. But so they're just really short blurbs for each lectionary reading that gives you some idea how to get into it. So so I throw that out for whatever, however that may be helpful. I think this book, The Season of Creation, a preaching commentary, has much more concrete ideas and it is much more contemporary. And it's got some really good contributors in it, including Norman Habel and Ched Myers, some really strong voices. And that's much more specific and about preaching on everything. So I just commend them to you for doing that. I'm going to take what I think over the years doing this has been the most difficult gospel for me to preach creation on. And that is, so this year, yeah, I think it falls the first Sunday of October. So would be the last for some of you and the first for others. And that's Mark 10, 2-16, which is the divorce gospel. When the Pharisees asked Jesus about is divorce ever legal, etc. So there seems to be no easy way into creation from there. But what I've done with a text like that in the past, I think it's important to talk about interpretive skills as you're preaching and how to get to a place where you see the big picture. So what I usually do with a text like that is I ask, why was Jesus against divorce? And I think most of us would agree here that this was about the loss of dignity for a woman and the fact that a woman couldn't protect herself in that culture without being attached to a man, and that Jesus's stance against divorce was to protect the woman and give her dignity. I don't think there's much question that if Jesus was here today, he would tell a woman to escape an abusive relationship in any way that she could, whether that was divorce or any other way. And the point I'm trying to make there is this is all about biblical interpretation and avoiding literal interpretations of the text always and forever. That because Jesus said divorce was wrong 2,000 years ago, it means that it's wrong now. And I think that's really helpful when you go through this process, because it brings up the obvious text in Genesis about being fruitful and multiplying, as you're talking about marriage here. And the evangelical approach to that, of course, is that means we should always be fruitful and multiply. And we all know where that has gotten us right now, because population growth is the most important part of bringing about some safety for creation. And so much of that has come about. So I guess you guys know the numbers, but just quickly, human population has grown more in the last 40 years than in the first 3 million years. And we all know what that is doing to the planet, and that is putting more pressure on the planet than anything else. So the Roman Catholic Catechism still reads that fecundity is a gift, an end in marriage for conjugal love naturally tends to be fruitful. Each and every marriage act remains ordered per se to the procreation of human life. In other words, the Roman Catholic Church is still teaching us that the only purpose of marriage is to have babies. That's what it says in their text. And that's how they interpret these texts, both of these texts. And I think that we need to preach that interpretation goes beyond that, and that we must do something about this. If the only reason for marriage is to have babies, that's giving us all kinds of other issues that we're dealing with. And in my mind, takes away the sanctity of marriage in many ways. And I think you can easily point out that that poor biblical interpretation has led to the destruction of the earth, and that's why we need to interpret the text to make sense in our own place and time, and that marriage cannot possibly be only about procreation. And that is the way to biblically interpret and save the planet. And I think that kind of approach with any text is always helpful, because we're doing the same thing that I started with at the beginning with the theology. We're going back and taking the church back to its incarnational nature, to the relationship of people with one another, and fighting what we have done to contribute to the destruction of the planet. And one of the main ways we have done that is through population growth that the church has said is not only okay, but is what we're supposed to be doing. So that's kind of the approach that I would take with a text like that. And that may sound harsh to some folks, but I personally think that we have to tackle head on how we got to this place at this present time. And I think we need to swallow crow for what we've done wrong as a church and fix it. And that's the way we fix it. We preach good theology and good interpretation of the Bible.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. I have some of the same resources that Steve does, preaching creation. And there's a lot of, you'll find that the creation care portion of the diocesan website has a lot of other resources for preaching as well. So feel free to find some of those on there as well. Not necessarily to give you specific tips on specific scriptural passages, but in terms of how to approach preaching for creation care, there's a lot of books on that you can find on the website. So the one that showed up during the season of creation that I thought would be a tough one is Mark 9:38 through 50. It's the one where the disciples come to Jesus and say, "Hey, teacher, we saw somebody casting out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he was not following us." Jesus says, "Don't stop him. Anyone who does a deed of power in my name will be able to, no one who does a deed of power in my name will be able to soon afterward to speak evil of me." And so he goes on to say, "For truly I tell you, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you bear the name of Christ will by no means lose the reward." And he talks about, what will happen if you put a stumbling block before one of those little ones who believe in me. So, all those nice, horrible things that will happen. And he finishes with that talk about, for everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its saltiness, how can you season it? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. Okay, so creation care. Where are we going to find a creation care sermon in that? So let me just, the way I usually approach this is I take our creation care theology and I look at ways that can mirror or be drawn out through some of that, the gospel passage. So in this one, I'm going to give you a couple of snippets from the gospel passage that you can kind of key off of for various reasons. So let's start with, whoever gives you a cup of water to drink because you bear the name of Christ will by no means lose the reward. So there's a water theme here that you can use, right? A cup of water is the gift that gives life. And this is what, this, if you go to Jennifer Phillips' book, this is the approach that she takes. Okay, so you can find a little bit more in there. But we understand the preciousness of water in Jesus's time because we live in a similar landscape. So you can make that connection. Jesus's habitat is also our own. Water is scarce. And in this world, in this country and in this world, it's not only the scarcity of water itself, but the scarcity of clean water. You can talk about that as well. You can talk about the impacts we're seeing of drought and even key off of that into why we are seeing such extreme drought, to talk a little bit about climate change. And then, of course, you can obviously talk about the importance of water conservation in a place like Arizona. So those are, you can do that whole water theme. You can, that's the most simple and direct one. But you can go to some more indirect options, and these are valid as well, I think. You can talk about, you can look at that passage, part of the passage that says, we saw someone casting out demons in your name and we tried to stop him because he was not following us. So you can talk about the inclusion exclusion theme here. So and get it from there into including creation and love for our neighbor, right? So Jesus was inclusive. We should be too, right? There's a little adage that I've heard time and time again, and I don't know where it started, but that whole idea that every time you draw a line between who's in and who's out, you'll find Jesus on the other side. Anybody ever heard that one before? Well, so that's a good point. Jesus is terribly inclusive. So is God the Father, the whole Godhead. God loves his whole creation, not just humankind. We're not the in crowd. We're only part of the larger crowd, right? It gives this, you can go from there into a very expansive view of the great commandment to love our neighbor as ourselves, and really drive home the point that creation is our neighbor. We are part of the web of life, right? We are intimately and deeply and our whole connected with the rest of creation. In fact, our existence depends on it. You can, this is an interesting one, but you can go into the fact that creation is partners with humankind in God's covenant after the flood back in Genesis. God established his covenant with not only Noah and his descendants, but with every living creature. So we are equal partners in God's covenant. And the covenant is to not destroy us. And so, that brings up the question of, do we have the right to destroy creation if God has covenanted not to? And so it's up to us to be at peace with God's creation. And you can talk a little bit about what that looks like. How do we, if we are that connected and we need to be at peace with creation, what does that look like? Okay. Similarly, you can use the snippet that says, if any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, to get to a pretty similar kind of analogy. Christ's care for the innocent believers is kind of analogous to God's care for his creation. And again, we're all beloved in God's eyes, including everything that he created. Make that point. I've wrestled a little with that, if you could use the have salt in yourselves part of that passage to talk a little bit, but there's some very interesting little aspects here. To kind of make the point that the natural world is a source of precious things to us, right? Because in the ancient world, salt was a precious commodity. It was used to flavor and preserve food, is used for medicinal purposes. It was even used kind of as salary. Roman soldiers were paid in salt rations, obviously a very precious thing. You can compare this to medicines that we're still finding in the natural world. You know, the kind of classic example is Taxol, which is an important ovarian and breast cancer drug that's made from a yew tree, was found in the last couple of decades, become a very important cancer drug, right? And then you can lead into the importance of biodiversity and talk about that. Salt was also used to seal covenants with God and one another. So you can talk about the natural elements as ways of bringing us together to remind us of our part of the web of life. So you can see that there's like multiple ways usually that you can go with a passage. If you pair kind of the theology of creation with some of these little, interesting snippets that facts that come out from really doing the exegesis on the passage and try to put those things together. And, there's all sorts of sources for facts about, things like the importance of biodiversity and all of those kinds of things that we can help you with if you need help with those. But there really is almost always more than one way to preach creation care out of a gospel passage. So take heart. It's not that hard to do. Just takes a little time to work it out. And some things are more direct than others. Questions about preaching and how to kind of do that, make those connections and pull those things out. Okay. So now let's go to kind of maybe the meat of our discussion today, but building a creation care liturgy for this season of creation. And this is definitely Steve's area of expertise. So I'm going to just hand it right over to him for the next section of this session. Go ahead, Steve.
Thanks, Pam. Just a real quick history part of this. The season of creation probably began with Matthew Fox's Cosmic Mass. Now, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that or know of it, but Matthew put together this mass back in the mid 90s into the later 90s, and his model for this kind of became the model of how we built the season of creation. But what Matthew did in those cosmic masses that mostly happened in the Bay Area was he had the service go from Good Friday to Easter. So all of those services started with the destruction of the planet, and he went through how we were destroying the planet and what that looked like, and he did that visually in videos and in artwork and in dance and lots of other ways. But he showed how we were screwing everything up in some pretty graphic ways, and then slowly built his way to Holy Saturday, and working his way through this into Easter and how we were going to bring the planet back to life. We all kind of started that way, but I think the purpose, what Matthew was trying to accomplish at the beginning, we don't need to be doing anymore. I don't think there's hardly anybody left on the planet that needs to be convinced that we're destroying the planet. So I don't do that anymore. I did at the beginning, because I think people did need the education and to learn about it, but I don't think anybody needs to know that anymore. So I start liturgies now with something not just positive, but something heart-wrenching and emotional that immediately attracts people's attention and connects them with what we're about to do. So I try to do that powerfully at the beginning of the service, some of the things that I've done to do that is the geological time clock. I don't, if you're all familiar with that, that's when somebody goes through the history of the planet and talks about the fact that human beings came here on a 24-hour time scale at 10 seconds before midnight. That's a really powerful story that you can tell in lots of different ways. And that's a great way to work into a service. Videos are also a really good way to do that. We have time here. I'll show you one real quick to give you an idea about what I'm talking about. Prayers to the four directions from an indigenous standpoint is a great way to get into a service and set a nice framework for what you're about to do. I like to use simple religious statements about the environment that have a spiritual connection to get people into the presence of what we're about to do. People like Terry Tempest Williams, Aldo Leopold, Wendell Berry, Native Voices, folks like that. And I'm going to give you a list of where to find a bunch of stuff like that. Other ways to call people to the sacredness of creation in various different forms. I've had indigenous drummers come in. Native flute music is a great artistic way to get into the body of something. So I think those kinds of ways are great ways to create a feeling and an emotional essence really quickly with what you're doing. Okay, so let me show you this video real quick here. Let's see, I need to.
One of the most exciting scientific findings of the past half century has been the discovery of widespread trophic cascades. A trophic cascade is an ecological process which starts at the top of the food chain and tumbles all the way down to the bottom. And the classic example is what happened in the Yellowstone National Park in the United States when wolves were reintroduced in 1995. Now, we all know that wolves kill various species of animals, but perhaps we're slightly less aware that they give life to many others. Before the wolves turned up, they'd been absent for 70 years, but the numbers of deer, because there was nothing to hunt them, had built up and built up in the Yellowstone Park, and despite efforts by humans to control them, they'd managed to reduce much of the vegetation there to almost nothing. They'd just grazed it away. But as soon as the wolves arrived, even though they were few in number, they started to have the most remarkable effects. First, of course, they killed some of the deer, but that wasn't the major thing. Much more significantly, they radically changed the behavior of the deer. The deer started avoiding certain parts of the park, the places where they could be trapped most easily, particularly the valleys and the gorges. And immediately those places started to regenerate. In some areas, the height of the trees quintupled in just 6 years. Bare valley sides quickly became forests of aspen and willow and cottonwood. And as soon as that happened, the birds started moving in. The number of songbirds and migratory birds started to increase greatly. The number of beavers started to increase because beavers like to eat the trees. And beavers, like wolves, are ecosystem engineers. They create niches for other species. And the dams they built in the rivers provided habitats for otters and muskrats and ducks and fish and reptiles and amphibians. The wolves killed coyotes. And as a result of that, the number of rabbits and mice began to rise, which meant more hawks, more weasels, more foxes, more badgers. Ravens and bald eagles came down to feed on the carrion that the wolves had left. Bears fed on it too, and their population began to rise as well, partly also because there were more berries growing on the regenerating shrubs. And the bears reinforced the impact of the wolves by killing some of the calves of the deer. But here's where it gets really interesting. The wolves changed the behavior of the rivers. They began to meander less. There was less erosion. The channels narrowed, more pools formed, more riffle sections, all of which were great for wildlife habitats. The rivers changed in response to the wolves. And the reason was that the regenerating forests stabilized the banks so that they collapsed less often, so that the rivers became more fixed in their course. Similarly, by driving the deer out of some places and the vegetation recovering on the valley sides, there was a soil erosion because the vegetation stabilized that as well. So the wolves, small in number, transformed not just the ecosystem of the Yellowstone National Park, this huge area of land, but also its physical geography.
So you get the idea. It's really important to give people hope now that we can make a difference, that we can change things. It's really easy now to say it's too late and we can't do anything. But if you can spark hope in some fashion, and a video like this that shows people what a difference can happen. David Attenborough just did a thing about what happened to the Earth last year during COVID. Something like that is also very helpful to people. So something that can give them hope and push them out the door with ideas about how to go about doing this, and to capture something emotionally to tug at their hearts, I think is really, really helpful. So those are some of the ideas for starting. Let me put up some sources for you, and Pam's already posted all these on the website, but let me talk a little bit about these. Okay. So is that up okay? So the first one on here is Earth Prayers. This is the book that I started using at the very beginning when I was doing this, because there was nothing else out there. I mean, there was nothing. But this book, this tiny little book, just has a lot of lovely individual prayers in it, and that's I find that very helpful. It's not easy to hook things up to the lectionary, but at the beginning, this is all we had. So it's still a really good source. So I do recommend that. They wrote another book called Honoring the Earth. This little book here, The Green Devotional, is just individual, very short writings to capture people's attention. Hamilton Poor's Earth Gospel is a liturgical book that has straight liturgical ideas and copies of liturgies that he's done. So that can be really helpful. O'Malley's A Celtic Primer is obviously rooted in the part of our tradition that never lost this. And he has some straight liturgies in there too that are really helpful. Anne Routhorn's first book on the subject, Earth and All Stars, she was writing as we were working on that season of creation committee. She's got some really nice stuff in there, including some creedal statements and some opening acclamations and closing prayers, benedictions that are quite nice. But her newest book, God's Good Earth, this is a really, really great reference. She has 50 some liturgies in here, all based on themes, and it's really easy to find things in there. She's got lots of music sources. She has prayers from different traditions, including many of ours. She's Episcopalian, of course. And this book, you can pull stuff right out of this book and use it. You don't even have to do anything else with it. So I highly recommend that book. It's a really good help. Wild Goose Publications has some really decent creation oriented stuff. Even in the Iona Abbey worship book, there are really nice prayers in there that I use a fair amount, and they're theologically grounded. It's very strong stuff, and it's well written. I mean, it's just really good liturgical stuff. So a lot of that you can just use straight out of their book too. Their Wild Goose Big Book of Liturgies has a lot of decent stuff in it too. Our own Enriching Our Worship, the Eucharistic prayers in Enriching Our Worship have been totally authorized for us to use by the bishop for creation care. And a couple of those prayers are very creation oriented. I would say much more so than, for example, Eucharistic Prayer C, which is also good. And I use Eucharistic Prayer C regularly too, with those couple changes that I mentioned at the beginning. So that's helpful. Pam already talked about the Book of Occasional Services from 2018. That's the stuff that our committee put together back in 2008 or whatever it was, and it finally got into publication in the book. It's not exactly the way we did it then, but it's really good stuff. So there are a half a dozen collects in there. So you could use those collects individually throughout the season. You can just pull them right out and drop them in as collects. Pam, we did one as the opening prayer. They have some prayers of the people in there. There's 3 sets of prayers of the people. There's 3 confessions, and I've been using the confession that we wrote at the beginning for a long time. There's 2 more in there now, and they are quite good and very well written. I'm talking about the ones that I didn't participate in writing. I don't want to say that about the one I wrote. And the Litany for the Planet is in there too, and that's a really nice litany. We actually use that on Ash Wednesday here to connect people to the earth, and it's really nice. So I commend all those to you. Online wise, here's a bunch of stuff, and Pam's has all these on the website, so you don't have to write them all down. But there's 2 Season of Creation websites. Seasonofcreation.com is in America. Seasonofcreation.org is from the Uniting Church in Australia. I actually find more prayers on that site than I do the one from here. LetAllCreationPraise.org is an ecumenical site. So you have to be careful what you pick and what it looks like, but I've used some stuff out of there. This Season of Creation website here that says Season of Creation 4 is from South Africa, and they have some lovely prayers in there and some really decent stuff. The next two sites are all quotations, creation care quotations. So if you just need like one sentence or something to get you somewhere, or to make a point, or to get to a theme, I love using ones like that. This Season of Creation one here is from Cape Town, South Africa. Those prayers are really nice too, because they have an indigenous flavor to them. So I find them really, really helpful. WatershedDiscipleship.org is Ched Meyer's site. And if you guys haven't heard of Ched Myers, I heartily recommend him to you. He's doing some really great stuff in creation care, and his theology is just impeccably good. Whoops. The Caros Earth site, that's Church of the Woods. And the bishop has authorized the Eucharistic prayer in Church of the Woods for all of us to use. So you can just use that Eucharistic prayer right out of that service. Here's the Anglican Communions resources, which are actually a little bit more prolific than the Episcopal churches right now. So that one's out there too. Sites that some of you clergy may be using regularly, like textweek.com and Blogspot, worshipblogspot.com. They both have creation pages on their website. So if you're used to using them, that's a really easy source to build into. I'll mention that our website here at GSP, we've put all of our creation liturgies starting the season on that website, so you can just pull them and you are allowed to use anything. And the good thing about ours is we put the sources down for every single thing that we use, so you can cite the right source. And I just commend you to look at them so that you can get some idea on that front, what you can do. And there you go. And there's the Episcopal Church's website too. Music-wise, Norman Habel is the guy that really began doing creation music. And some of his stuff is a little dated now because he's been doing this for so long, but he is still the go-to person for creation-centered music. Carolyn Winfrey Gillette is a very prolific writer of music, and she writes stuff. I'm sure most of you have come across her all the time still. Some people do not like her style at all, but even if that's the case, I urge you to at least look at her creation stuff, because some of it is pretty decent, and it's very easy to build into our liturgies. Okay. Christopher Lindquist was the music director here at Grace St. Paul's before me, and he wrote a whole book of Taizé kind of centered music, and much of it is creation oriented. I don't know how to access that because it's not easily accessible on the web. So I can get you his music book for any of you who are interested. Just ask me and I'll get that for you if Taizé kind of creation music is helpful. So we can get that for you. That Let All Creation Praise website has one section that is nothing but hymns. So that's a great way to look for stuff. And again, God's Good Earth by Ann Routhorne. She has great music in there that you can choose from. And of course, we have plenty of creation-centered music in all of our hymnals. In the hymnal, in Wonder, Love, and Praise, Voices Found has some really decent creation-centered stuff in it. So, and the great thing about that is you can easily tie that to the lectionary and find music that matches the lectionary readings well, okay? So we talked about the Book of Occasional Services. So there are lots of sources for opening acclamations and affirmations of faith and confessions and Eucharistic prayers, and I just mentioned most of those to you, and I just stuck down there which ones the bishops already authorized to use. I just mentioned here the New Zealand prayer book, Lord's Prayer, is a lovely prayer for the season of creation. That you might want to just substitute for the Lord's Prayer, during the season of creation or the first Sunday or something, to use that prayer. And they're taking readings from modern day prophets who connect to the earth is also a really helpful way to do that. We're going to use the lectionary throughout the season of creation. That's what we do here. We don't stray from the lectionary, but we do add readings from other sources. We call them continuing revelation. So that's another way to get ideas in. And of course, everything in the news now is based on climate change and land and water protection rights and that kind of thing. So it's easy to find stuff in the contemporary world that will fit right into your liturgy too. So that's a whole bunch in a little amount of time.
Steve, I was just wondering what kind of latitude do we have in using a lot of those resources? Is it mainly during the season of creation? I mean, I've seen Carol and Gillette's music and prayers, and it's like, why can't we use this? Our 1982 hymnal is so stuck in other centuries, and Catholic hymnals and even Lutheran hymnals are much more contemporary language. And I'm just wondering, what latitude do we have to explore other resources and to be able to use them in our liturgies, at least during the season of creation? I know you've got special dispensation from the bishop because you're Grace St. Paul's, but just in general.
So I don't want to speak out of turn, Pam, so stop me if I am, but
Okay.
Music-wise, we can use virtually any music we want. We don't have to take music from the hymnal. We've got 6 hymnals already, but as far as I know, the bishop hasn't told us that we can't use music from outside sources. So I believe that Carolyn stuff is totally available to all of us. The bishop has only authorized certain Eucharistic prayers, and they're on the list, okay? And the one that's totally out of our box is the Church of the Woods Episcopal Eucharistic prayer. But Enriching Our Worship has some decent ones too. Like I said, we use the lectionary readings, but we can add to that, and we can add other readings.
Yep.
So,
Can I jump in for a second, Steve?
Yep.
The other thing that Steve's right with all that. The other thing for the season of creation that the bishop has authorized for the option to substitute for lectionary readings one Sunday, another set of readings that are creation care themed. So, and for those of you who are clergy, that was in the email that was sent to you. But I can, and I don't have that up at the website right now, but I've made a note to put it up so that you can find that as well if you can't find your email. But so she wants the churches to be able to have one Sunday with a set of very creation centric scriptural passages to work with. But otherwise she wants you to stick with the lectionary. And for non-Eucharistic services, she's kind of thrown the door wide open. So if you are doing something during the week or and anytime that it's a non-Eucharistic service, you can do be a lot more experimental if you want.
You know, I was going to recommend also another book by Brendan O'Malley, and that's A Celtic Eucharist. We use this and have frequently used it for our Celtic liturgy we have on Saturday afternoon each month. But Steve, I had a question for you in regards to last year we did the creation, season of creation. And in what we were using, there were 4 Sundays in that period of September the 1st to October the 4th. And with that, each Sunday had some aspect of the geography of the planet in mind, like ocean,
Right.
forest. Now, when you do it for October and November, which I really find that very, very attractive, how do you expand upon the 4 that usually is put in some sort of cycle?
Yeah, so there's been 2 general approaches that people have taken over the years, and one is the themed service, as you've described, and the stuff that I gave you out of Australia is very much like that. It's themed, but we just do an entire season and base the theme of the service on the lectionary. So I just look at the lectionary and try to pull out the creation-oriented theme that will fit with the whole service, and then I do all the prayers around that theme, and set it up like that.
Oh, okay.
So that's the way we do it.
Yeah,
And take a look at Grace St. Paul's liturgies that they've done. You can see how Steve does this. It's very interesting to see how he crafts this. So I do encourage you to use their archives as a resource.
And Monica, again, I don't want to speak out of term, but of course, prayers of the people were always authorized to change. And in fact, I don't know how this church ever got the idea that we were supposed to use the prayers of the people in the prayer book. That was never the intention of the authors of the prayer book. That was just to give us ideas on how to do prayers of the people. So prayers of the people are always open to do however we want. We've got the confessions that are in the Book of Occasional Services. And we've got plenty of opening acclamations you can do, and the collects. We have all those collects in there, so you can do a fair amount there without stepping on anything. I hope that's helpful.
Any other questions on liturgy? Thanks, Steve. So we're at 11 minutes after 12, and I hope that we can just take a few more minutes. I'm going to quickly kind of try to throw out some ideas for parish events that you can do during the season of creation. And if other people want to throw out other ideas as well, I'm going to kind of characterize this as a brainstorming session. But just, because I think to make it really a season of celebration, that sometimes you need to do some things other than just change the liturgy, right? So just some ideas that some come from things that have been done, and some are just ideas that are out there that make sense for creation season. You can do kind of what I'd call a creation fair. So, a time when, whether it's, associated with a Sunday service or another time where, you can have booths and fun things and, maybe food, but have some education, get some ideas out there. You can do it with, just the resources you have in your own church, or you can invite outside groups in. I think Grace St. Paul's has done some this kind of thing where sometimes they've had outside groups who come in and start teaching about, wildlife or biodiversity or, energy use or whatever. And so you can bring it in and have it to be really kind of a fun occasion, but occasion where people can really learn too. You can do a movie night. There's a lot of really interesting videos that are really eye-opening about the earth and what's going on and what we can do. Some of them are listed on the Creation Care part of the website. I'm going to try to beef that section up too, so that there's some good choices. One I saw recently that Interfaith Power and Light was offering us the chance to see was called Kiss the Ground, which changed my whole way of thinking about soil and the importance of healthy soil and how we do agriculture. But there's, everything for that one. There's one called The Human Element, which is also very interesting. Some of you may have heard of Journey of the Universe, which is a real kind of cosmic approach to creation care. There's a ton of them. So it's pretty simple to kind of put together a movie night. Doesn't take a whole lot of effort. Pretty simple usually to get these films. So that's an option. Getting outside, get your people outside one way or another, connecting people in a very physical and therefore developing a spiritual way of connection to creation is important. The whole kind of concept of what some places call a holy hike might be an idea for some of you. Get outside, take a beautiful hike, celebrate the Eucharist at some point along the way, either at an end point before you turn around or along the way. You don't have to do the Eucharist, but it kind of builds in that connection. Plant things, find some way to plant things. Start a garden or a community garden. This can be the kickoff. You can work on replacing water-intensive landscaping with drought-tolerant plants if you want to go that direction at your parish. Just some way that you can let people get their hands in the dirt. It's a great connection. If you're interested, your people might be interested in participating in the carbon tracker, Sustain Island Home. You can organize an event around that and help people get signed up. I can come help or send somebody to help with that if you want to do that. You can arrange to bring in a local farm or multiple farms that offer local or organic produce for sale, so that your parish can have that opportunity and maybe open it up to the community. Here we are, St. Andrews is offering, produce to the community, sustainably grown organic produce. Arrange a parish cleanup event at a local park. Cleanup events are a good way for, really, especially if your people don't quite understand about creation care and just giving them a chance to actually participate in making the planet better. It makes them feel proud in their connection to taking care of the earth. So those are some ideas I have. Anybody else have other ideas that they've done or heard of that could be an event?
You can commission Vicky Stefani to make a stole for you. All this
Vicky.
wildlife all over them and show off to the world what we're talking about here. So,
Vicky, you and I have to talk. Okay.
oh my gosh, it is the most beautiful thing ever, you guys. You have to see it. It's just unbelievable. Thank you again, Vicky.
Well, you're welcome, Steve. And Pam, we can talk.
Good. Yeah, so there's just think, brainstorm with your own folks. What can we do? I know we're still coming out of COVID, so some ideas are easier than others, but there's a lot of ways to really remember that a lot of it's about making connections to the earth. That's the most important thing, to make the connection, right? Okay. Questions that you, sorry, Kathy, were you talking?
I was slow to unmute. The beloved in the group here in Tucson, Madison worked at the Habitat for Humanity office and coordinated a neighborhood buffalo grass cleanup on an empty lot in one of the barrios, and it was a wonderful collaboration with Habitat and the beloved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great idea. And in fact, that's one of those things that's kind of like a park cleanup, but kind of at the next level and very important is, when there are opportunities to eradicate invasive species that are really a problem, and buffalo grass is a huge one. I know that isn't there the Tucson area national parks do coordinate that kind of a thing too, don't they?
Yes.
And so that's a great way to do something, and if you can coordinate and find out if there's somebody in your community locally that already offers that kind of thing, that's a great way to kind of get somebody else to do the work to organize, right? And get your parish involved. So great idea, Kathy. I love that. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on anything that we've talked about, or that you have in general? I've actually had a couple questions from people ahead of this that couldn't make it, about what colors do we use for the season for vestments and frontals and that kind of thing. Is there anything prescribed? So let me just address that one, and or Steve can jump in, but there is no, obviously, because we don't have an officially designated season of creation with all the trappings associated with it at this point. There is no designated color. So there are options. And, since you're in, to differentiate from being in ordinary time, which is green, you might not want to go with the obvious choice, right, which is green. So Steve, when I was talking to him about this, he said, blue is a good option. Blue is another, important. If you think of the view of Earth from space, you have a lot of blue. So blue is a good option. You can, what about all those colors out there that you don't use very often? You can mix and match, right? You can get Vicky to make stoles for you, right?
Yeah, I have nothing else to do. Can I say this, that I made some hangings as well. And the inspiration for that were the 4 elements: earth, air, water, and fire. And so in those, and also in the stole, I used the colors that coordinated with those 4 elements, which kind of gave me a framework to work with.
Where are you located, Vicki?
I'm in Tucson.
Oh, you're in Tucson. Okay.
St. Andrews.
Okay.
And if you go kind of the way Steve talked about, pulling a kind of a theme from the lectionary readings, if you've got, say, a water theme, that would be a good Sunday to use blue, right? Maybe if you're talking fire, you're going with the red. So you can just be creative and think creatively until we can make an official color. Are there any questions? Other questions?
Steve, you were reading from some document. Is that document available on the diocesan webpage? There are tons of resources there, and I just didn't know if there was some main source.
I was reading from a document.
Well, you were sharing a document with all of your resources.
Oh, yeah, that
on the screen.
Yes, Pam put those resources up on the website.
So they all should be under the creation care part of the website. So you can get to that directly by going to, what is it? creation.ac.org. And if you go to the tab that's prayer and worship, under there's a whole block about season of creation. And so I've put Steve's resources in there. The ones that weren't already up on the site are there. Books, there are some books you will find under the learning tab. So, when I talked about some other preaching book sources, you can find those there. Some other, so, but just, go through and I encourage you to kind of get to know what's on the creation care part of the website, because there'll be a lot of resources, including just things about, what people can do, you know, using plastics, energy, water, how to create a green team at your church document, things like that. So.
And if you can't find something, Monica, let me know, okay? Or any of you.
Yeah.
But all of those that I shared with you are on the website. Okay, that I put up on the screen.
Okay.
Okay.
And if you have a resource that you like, that you want to share, let me know and let me know what it is, and I can get it up on the website also. Okay. Other questions? Yeah. Kathy.
Another question. A very traditional oriented member of our worship committee was concerned about calling this a season in fear of elevating it to the level of Easter and Christmas and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Any advice?
Well, this is the goal, actually, is to actually elevate it to that status. That's something really for general convention. So, but the bishop has signed off on us calling it the season of creation, and to observe it in that way, with her parameters on it, which she does believe are important. It's, if we're going to really officially call it a season of creation, then we have to, she feels we have to follow certain things liturgically. So, I mean, if you can say that the bishop has authorized it to be called this, and that there are efforts, I don't know how seriously ongoing they will be for the next general convention to actually get this officially designated.
And Kathy, the other thing I'll just add is the fact that this is now in the Book of Occasional Services as a season of creation, you know, is an authorized book of the church that has done this. And that was the compromise position at General Convention. You know, last General Convention, one of our 3 tenets was creation care. But the compromise was, okay, let's not put it in the prayer book now. Let's get it in the Book of Occasional Services and get it out there. So it is authorized by the church.
And it just, you reminded me of something, Steve, that it's actually creation care is actually one of the 5 marks of mission for the Anglican Church. So this isn't some kind of new age, artsy fartsy.
This isn't some Sedona type thing.
Yeah, it's not just some Sedona thing.
That's right. It's only in Sedona.
I would just say I use daily prayer for all seasons, and they split the ordinary time into a season of creation and a season of rest. So there are some really good prayers in there as well.
Nice. And just to go back to the timing again, the reason that I chose St. Francis Day to Christ the King Sunday was to literally split Pentecost in half, so that we would have, because everybody gets tired of the season after creation anyway. So I just split it right in half and said, this is the other season. So the whole point, as Pam said, is to create another season in the church year.
Right. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll make the recording of this available. I'm going to see if I can get it up on the website so that others who weren't able to make it or decide later they should have attended can access it. And feel free to contact me following up as you work on this. And I'm Steve, I assume they can contact you as well if they want to follow up on things that you said.
Yep, come back every day you can.
Yep. So, and thank you all for joining us today.
Great, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And good luck with your season of creation.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.